These are constitutional rights. They're not to be trifled with. And politicians that think that these constitutional rights can be trifled with, in my opinion, don't understand the Constitution. And so red flag laws, are another attempt to trifle with the Constitution and chip away at civil liberties. And I will oppose that.
We're here today with U.S. Senate candidate Corky Messner from New Hampshire, and we want to talk your policy on guns and why we want to see you in the U.S. Senate. So welcome, Corky.
Thanks, Dudley. Thanks for having me, and I really appreciate it.
And you're talking to us from your home in what part of New Hampshire?
I'm in Wolfboro, New Hampshire, the Lakes region. So yeah, it's very rural here, very rural.
Yeah, that's nice. And I know from my time in New Hampshire, it is a truly pro-gun state. It's a state with a lot of gun owners and a lot of shooters and hunters and outdoorsmen and people who just like being outside.
Absolutely true. Many gun owners, very, very avid outdoors people here, including me. I go fishing. I go out. I was out just last week with my son, firing our guns and for recreational and bonding purposes. And it's very much the culture here in New Hampshire.
What do you like to shoot, Corky? What do you and your son like to shoot?
Well, I have several guns. We have a few pistols. I have a Sig Sauer, and I also got a Smith & Wesson 45, and we have my favorite gun, Dudley, quite frankly, is a Marlin 45-70, and the rounds on that thing are about that big. And then we also have a long rifle, an AR, several ARs, and shotgun, and several other pistols.
Now, 45-70 is a interesting caliber because it dates way back into the 19th century, and some people call it a buffalo gun or a bear gun. In fact, I'm scheduled to go on a bear hunt in New England next fall, and that's what I'll be shooting is a 45-70 lever action. So.
Yeah, that's exactly what I have. And my son's bought me that for my birthday last year.
Family heirloom in the making.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
The nice part is they don't go bad. They don't really decay much.
That's right.
I mean, there are only two enemies for a gun. One is rust, and the worst one is politicians.
Yeah, you're right. I agree.
And you grew up in Pennsylvania, I understand.
Altoona, Pennsylvania, the middle of deer country. And I grew up seeing people driving their cars in the fall with a deer strapped across the hood of it. That was sort of a badge of honor back in Altoona in the day.
Sure. And during the beginning weeks of deer season, every guy got off of school for a week to go out try and fill their tag. That's
right. That's exactly right.
Right. So you're running for the U.S. Senate in New Hampshire, and you're running against a longtime Democrat, former governor and U.S. Senator. I think she has the record for being the only female governor then U.S. Senator. That's kind of interesting. But Senator Shaheen is very far to the left of the average population in your state.
Yes, she is, Dudley. She is a progressive and very liberal. And what she does, Dudley, is she goes to D.C. and she hides in the fog of Washington, D.C. She votes very, very liberal. She is loyal to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. And then she comes back to New Hampshire and pretends like she's a moderate. And she's no moderate.
Yeah, that's generally how many politicians hide, especially in states that are swing states or even red states. And I know New Hampshire's had its fair share of ups and downs, like many states. But from what I know of New Hampshire, and I spent some time there in working in politics, you have a really good, solid core of conservatives and conservative values in the state and your state legislature, people who just don't think you should trample a constitutional right. And so I think they're looking for another U.S. senator who would defend those.
That's exactly right, Dudley. That is, and I'm that person, and I'm going to beat Jeanne Shaheen. And the mood on the ground here is very energetic to get someone in the U.S. Senate who's going to stand for those core values that are so important to Granite Staters.
Yep. So tell me, what would you do to protect gun rights as a U.S. senator?
Oh, there's several things I would do. First of all, I would oppose any legislation that tries to regulate, diminish at all the Second Amendment. You know, and then secondly, as a senator, you know, we advise and consent on judicial appointments. And I'm a strict constructionist as far as the Constitution goes. And I would take the time to interview every judicial appointee and talk to them about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment. And I'm a trained lawyer, Dudley. I know how to ask the questions. And I would vet them thoroughly to make sure that our constitutional rights and the Bill of Rights are protected.
Well, and in this case, many of the nominees that are coming through the Trump administration have been very solid. I think the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch is a perfect example of maybe one of the best judicial nominees to the Supreme Court in 30 years. Someone who understands civil liberties. And just yesterday, though, we got word that the ATF director nominee was defeated, and our organization played a big role in that, and largely because Canterbury had a very, very poor history on guns, in fact, in favor of gun controls. And so when nominees, it's not just the courts, nominees into crucial portions of the administration, those questions need to be asked.
Yes, so I agree. For every appointee that comes before the U.S. Senate.
One of the big issues you're going to face in the U.S. Senate, should you get there, could be the red flag issue. And it's being debated in state legislatures. I know it was a big issue in New Hampshire and as well as Congress. And we anticipate that fight to keep going. Yeah. So what are your positions on that?
I'm opposed to any red flag laws. Absolutely opposed to them. It is yet another attempt by liberals to chisel away at the Second Amendment and to leverage, you know, tragic circumstances to do that. And I just won't allow that to happen. It's in my opinion, Dudley, it's an example of you know, the liberals taking any crisis to leverage it to further their agenda. And as it relates to civil liberties and the Second Amendment, these are constitutional rights. They're not to be trifled with. You know, and politicians that think that these constitutional rights can be trifled with, in my opinion, don't understand the Constitution. And so red flag laws, you know, are another attempt to trifle with the Constitution and chip away at civil liberties. And I will oppose them.
And the due process uh, requirements that our country imposes at almost every level of courts are being eroded pretty dramatically by these concepts that we're going to just use the specious claims, even done sometimes via phone to a judge, and to take someone's civil liberties immediately. And that somehow that's going to keep us safe. And I think not only is it wrong to do, but it's also doesn't really reach their goals, which is supposedly to keep us safe.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dudley. It's the there is no logical approach to what the liberals try to do with this. And what I mean by that is this whole idea that somehow these laws will make us safer is history tells us that it's just not the case. And there will always be criminals, there will always be lawbreakers, and the lawbreakers will take advantage of those laws, and in fact the result of which we're not safer. And as a society, we shouldn't feel safe by these laws, because it's, how long does it take for law enforcement to get to your house? With someone who's breaking the law coming into your house, and so it's our right to self-defense.
I jokingly call law enforcement forensic historians because they're really responding and coming too late to help most of the time. And that's generally true. It's not their fault. That's just the nature of the situation.
That's right.
And you really have to take it into your own hands that you might possibly have to defend yourself, your loved ones, or even strangers from who are innocent from unwarranted force. And that's really why this Second Amendment exists. Mass shootings really make big headlines, and often they hurt the movement to protect gun ownership. Now, how would you counter those who point to these tragic situations as proof that gun ownership should be prohibited or at least strictly limited?
Yeah, several ways. In my opinion, Dudley, the cases where there's been these tragic, horrific acts of violence, in most often it's a mental health cultural problem. And someone who wants to do harm, someone who has issues, psychological issues, and they want to do harm, are going to find a way to do harm. Whether, so it's not the vehicle by which they do harm. It could be a car. It could be a homemade explosive device. So these are really mental health and cultural issues that we have to deal with here, and it's not the instrument, And so I think that's most important. I think secondly, culturally, we need to pay attention to people. We need to pay attention when people are having problems, and we need to look out for our neighbors and make sure they get any help they need. And so I don't. I mean, a gun is an instrument, and someone who has mental health issues and who want to do harm, will find a way to do it. And no matter what, and even if and they would find a gun somehow if they were outlawed. It's the old thing: if guns are outlawed, outlaws will have guns.
Yeah, and often those mass shooters, it's not like they have a deterrent effect for gun control. They don't sit around and think, wow, I'm going to spend another 2 weeks in jail or another 2 years in jail because this this law is in effect, and so I can't take the gun there. That it really doesn't work. It's somewhat akin to saying we posted a sign up that we're not allowing the COVID-19 flu in our office. You know, I mean, you can say that all you want, but it doesn't really stop anything. And,
that's right.
And posting up signs that say no guns, all it really does is makes the law-abiding people say, okay, I guess I can't carry my concealed handgun permitted concealed handgun there into the school. But guess what? The criminals do anyway.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
So if you join the U.S. Senate, Corky, who do you see as kind of like the people you angle toward, or you would emulate, you would be most like in the U.S. Senate?
Yeah, great question. And I must correct you, though, Dudley, when I'm in the U.S. Senate, not if I'm going to be in the U.S. Senate.
Okay.
I like Rand Paul. I like the way he thinks. I like his positions. I like the way he thinks about the Constitution. Mike Lee from Utah, the same. So I think those two I would gravitate towards.
They're both very constitutionally minded. They both have a very solid background on principles, and the other fact is they're both NAGR members. So
great.
and very active.
I didn't know that.
And I think most people would admit they're most solid conservatives in the U.S. Senate, and we need more like them. Simple fact. So. We think this seat actually might be the determining seat in control of the U.S. Senate, on which party controls it. And while, of course, I'm a Republican and want to see Republicans control the U.S. Senate, continue to control it, I'm a conservative first, and I want to see solid conservatives in larger numbers there. And so the real question is how do you see this seat shaping up? Is this race really a knockdown, drag out for control of the U.S. Senate?
Oh, yeah. I think the way the Senate map lines up this cycle is there's 23. I think it's 23 Republicans that are up this cycle and 12 Democrats. So from that perspective, we have a lot more seats to defend. There's thought to be 5 or 6 vulnerable Republicans and 2 or 3 vulnerable Democrats. The vulnerable Democrats are Jeanne Shaheen, Doug Jones in Alabama, and Gary Peters in Michigan. So this is, and there's, I don't want to go through the list of Republicans, but it is very, very important that we flip this seat to retain control of the Senate. And we've got to fight this battle hard, really, really hard. And it can be done. And one, Jeanne Shaheen is vulnerable. She is vulnerable. She's brittle. She's stale here. 2, President Trump lost New Hampshire by 2,700 votes in 2016. That's it. Kelly Ayotte lost in 2016 by about 1,000 votes. The Libertarian in the 2016 election received 30,000 votes here in New Hampshire. 30,000 votes. Governor Sununu is incredibly popular here. His approval rating in handling the COVID crisis is 75% and above. 75% approval amongst Democrats. Jeanne Shaheen's approval rating in a poll that just came out 2 or 3 weeks ago just hovers slightly above 50%. And so she's vulnerable, and this seat is going to be very, very important to keep control of the Senate. Extremely important.
And maybe my last question is an interesting one you've probably never been asked. a U.S. senator, not only do they have that 1/100th of the U.S. Senate vote, right, but you also have a bully pulpit,
Yes.
and in your own state especially.
Yes.
They can wield enormous power for or against any given issue and candidate. And will you use that to advance more people like you, more conservatives, into positions so that one, you could take back the legislature and put real conservatives back in charge and as a U.S. senator?
Thanks for that question. It's a good question because, one, absolutely. And for me, Dudley, I've had a successful military and business career. I've accomplished a lot in my life. So I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. And I work really, really hard. It's how I'm wired. So I will be working all the time with laser focus on fighting for granted staters and fighting for conservative values. And like I say out on the trail, I've been to cocktail parties all over the country in my business career. I've been to fancy dinners all over the country in my business career. I don't like them. I'm not going to do them in DC. I'm going to be that senator, who's on C-SPAN at night, giving speeches on the Senate floor when there's nobody there. And every second I can be back here in New Hampshire, I'm going to be back here out listening to people, out talking to people, out spreading the message. For me, every day is an opportunity to interact with people and tell them who I am and tell them about the importance of conservative values. And those values are the values that have made this country exceptional.
And those are the values that gave you your license plate motto and your made New Hampshire, let's face it, kind of famous for loving liberty.
That's right.
And that's why our PAC endorsed you, is
Thank
because
you.
we like that kind of candidate. We only get involved for people we believe really truly love liberty and will fight for it, and won't just go along to get along once they're in office or forget their values when they get there. And that's why we wanted to be involved and want to get you to the U.S. Senate. So good luck, and we're gonna be there every step of the way.
Thank you, Dudley. I really appreciate it. I'm very thankful, and anything I can do to help you in your cause, please let me know.